So with that, I'm just going to turn this over to Radhika, and thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. I'm not going to stand behind the mic. I know I have a loud voice, but if you can't hear me, just let me know. Then I don't want to constrain myself back there. I just wanted to say I had a handout. I only made 20 copies, and I see more than 20 people here. But we will, if you didn't get one, we will have this on our website. So you will be able to go to our website, go to the resources pages, and find this handout and download it as a PDF form. So you should be okay with that. So this talk is really geared towards beginners. If you've never really gardened with native plants before in your yard, it's really geared towards the beginner. And I'm not going to discourage experts from not staying, but I'm just qualifying this presentation today. The whole idea is when you start gardening with native plants, you begin with plants that are easier to grow in a garden environment, in a garden situation. So this talk is geared towards introducing a handful of plants that you can begin with. Today's talk agenda is I'm going to spend some time dispelling myths about growing native plants, talk a little bit about the benefits of native plants, how to get started, and then 5 plants in each category, annual, perennial, shrubs and trees, and then leave you with some resources. There are a lot more resources available on our website as well, so don't be constrained to the list in the handout. So please feel free to go look that up. So there are a lot of myths about native plants, and they come about for various reasons. The first myth is native plants are ugly. And I think this myth comes about because most of us are out and about hiking and doing outdoor stuff in the summer months when our kids have time off from school. And that's the dormant time for most native plants. Native plants are kind of sleeping, they're getting ready to spread their seeds and start the next growing seasons. But native plants aren't really ugly. If you look at some of these pictures here, they are actually quite beautiful. There are many early settlers who came to California who have written journals and articles about California plants and flowers in the old European newsletters and magazines from 2 centuries, a century ago. And these are still available today in our archives. Botanists started visiting California from the early 1700s, and they started taking seeds, cuttings, and plants back to Europe. Some plants are very popular in English gardens, and once you become familiar with some of our native plants, you go back and visit some of those old English gardens, you'll be taken by surprise. You'll say, oh, I know that one. That's the Ceanothus, Or a really popular California native plant in English gardens is the bush anemone, the Carpentaria californica, for example. So, there are many, many plants, much more than these 2, that you would find in European gardens, and they've been there a really long time as well. The other myth has to do with fire, and this is a really big situation and issue in California. Well, the fact of the matter is all plants, whether they're native or not, will burn when you heat them to a high temperature. This is a fact. One of the other issues we have in California in the summer when fire hazard is high is that most plants, whether they're native or not, are dehydrated because of lack of water. And that makes them also more susceptible to fire. And there are a whole slew of non-native trees and plants and shrubs in our environments today that, like the eucalyptus and many of the invasive grasses around, that are very fire-prone. In fact, as you drive around and you look at the hillsides in the summer, everything that's going brown, they are all non-native annual grasses. None of our hillsides around here have native grasses anymore. They're all invasive, non-native grasses that go brown in the summer because without rain, without water, they die, they basically go brown. And all our native grasses have been replaced over a century ago. It's not something we did. Over a century ago, they've been replaced by non-native grasses that were brought in as fodder for the cattle. which is why, if you see the cows over on Stanford Hills, for example, what they like to eat and what they do eat down are the non-native grasses. That's what they like. Many native plants are fire adapted. This term fire adapted has come into use probably about 5 to 10 years ago. This really implies the adaptation of plants to fire, and it doesn't mean that they resist fire. It means they know how to live with fire. So, for example, the ponderosa pine, for example, has a thick bark, and its lowest branches are pretty high off the ground. It's fire adapted to avoid surface fires. That's an example of fire adaptation of a native plant. Manzanitas are another great example of fire adaptation, and there are many other examples like that. The giant sequoia, for example, is a great example of a fire adapted tree. The only way a giant sequoia can get to its size and its dimensions is because of its fire adaptation. It resists the forest fires that kill the undergrowth trees, and so it kills basically its competition. If those undergrowth trees didn't die from the fire, the sequoias would get crowded out, and they'd never have the opportunity to get to the size that they actually get to. There are homes in areas that are prone to fire have established guidelines mainly to do with the perimeter around the house for fire safety. And this was well illustrated during the famous Oakland Hill fires. Homes that followed the guidelines were saved right in the middle of the fire zones, and homes that didn't follow the guidelines, unfortunately, succumbed to the fire. A third myth is that native plants are hard to grow. Well, they have evolved in this climate and soil, and they're actually really easy to grow. But you have to know and understand the conditions under which they need to grow. The real issue has to do with the fact that their growth requirements are different from the non-native plants. All the non-native plants that we grow in our gardens today, that have become invasives in our landscapes today, were brought here by the early Europeans, either from Europe or from eastern United States. And they brought them here because everyone is trying to create a piece of their home and how their home looked where they came from. Unfortunately, plants that are adapted to European climates, most European climates and the East Coast climates, got water throughout the summer months, for example. So it rains all through the summer in Boston, if you've ever been there. So unfortunately, they would, in the early years, about 100 years ago, people brought native plants into the gardens because they thought, well, native plants, this plant has a beautiful flower, I want to grow it in my garden. But they watered it through the summer, for example. And our native plants don't like summer water. They've been adapted to grow without summer water. So when you overwater native plants that are summer water, that don't require summer water, they tended to either die out early or they just didn't survive. And that's how these myths came about. There is a tremendous diversity among native plants. Depending on which botanist you talk to, there are about 6 to 9 native plant communities in California, and each of them has different soil, water, sun exposure requirements. So it is easy to pick plants that are, that can adapt to grow in garden conditions. So this photograph here is the St. Catharines Lace. It's a big plant with a full cap of white flowers, and the Pacific wax myrtle in the Sunnyvale garden. Myth number 4 is native plants are hard to find. This certainly was true some years ago, but not true anymore. This is just a small sampling of the nurseries where you can buy native plants. Central Coast Wilds, they are here today. Go downstairs and go out the door and they're selling native plants. There are many other nurseries that sell online, or you can go in person, and some of them are in our neighborhoods. Yerba Buena is in Woodside. Central Coast and Native Revival Nursery is Aptos in Santa Cruz on the other side of the mountains. Larna Seeds is in Bolinas. And let's see, I think, let's see, no, I thought this was here, but another thing you can do is you can just go to your local nursery and give them the Latin name of your plant, and they will obtain it for you. So you can go to your local Palis nursery and ask them for this, or summer winds. Myth number 5 is native plants are expensive. Well, it really depends on the nursery and the plant. I have purchased plants at local nurseries like Palis or the Almaden Valley Nursery, and they're no more expensive than other plants. You know, the price range is between $8 and $12 a gallon, depending on the plant. And the 4-inch pots are less expensive. You can propagate native plants from seeds and cuttings. I wouldn't recommend this if you're a beginning gardener, but once you're started gardening with native plants and, you know, or you're a veteran gardener who knows a lot about growing plants from cuttings and seeds, you know, give it a shot. It actually works quite well. Myth number 6 is all native plants are drought tolerant. As I mentioned already, we have 6 to 9 plant communities in California, and each one has different water requirements. So not all of them are drought tolerant. There are in fact over 5,000, which is a conservative number. It's almost 6,000 species, subspecies, varieties of native plants in California. This is as much as the variety that's available in the combined contiguous rest of the United States, by the way. The only other state, the next state that has the largest number of plants is the large state of Texas, which has a little under 3,000 species and subspecies of plants. So California, by far, you know, its biodiversity is staggering to imagine. Now, of these over 5,000 species, some require less water, but some require a lot of water. You know, if it's a riparian plant, a plant that grows in a pond, it will not be drought tolerant. Some require sun and shade. Some require slopes and lean soil. While some plants that are adapted to growing in the Bay Area clay, you know, grow well in clay. So everything has to do with which plants you pick for the area that you're growing it in. Native or not, all young plants require regular water until fully established. Now this is a common mistake that people make. Just because you pick a plant for your garden that is drought tolerant doesn't mean that you can plant it, say now, in April or May, and not water it this summer. You know, it will die. You know, it's a young plant with a little root. It needs some water to grow. So later in this talk, I have a slide that shows what should be your watering schedule for a young plant. So we'll get to that. Benefits of native plants. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes here on the benefits of native plants, or maybe it's more than a couple of minutes. They are beautiful. I think they are beautiful, and a lot of people agree. They are economical. This is something that people tend to ignore. Your cost savings is actually quite a lot if you use native plants in your garden, because you save, if you use the drought-tolerant kinds, you save on water, you save on chemicals and fertilizers, you save on even compost if you just let the leaf litter do its work, and don't pay for the mow and blow guy to blow away all your leaves and then supplement it with bringing in compost. And your maintenance cost goes down tremendously. You know I personally, the year that I only looked at it 1 year. The year I changed my garden over to a native garden and I had it established, I looked at how much water, how much I saved on my water bill that whole year. I saved $1,600 that year. You know, so hey, that gets to be, these things add up and they get to be significant. You know, I don't buy fertilizers, I don't buy chemicals of any sort, and I still grow a combination of fruit trees, vegetables, and you know, native plants. I have a composting bin, so I get my compost, I make my own compost, and I do occasionally buy a little fruit tree organic fertilizer, I confess. It's good for the environment. The ecological benefits of native plants are, I have a slide on this later on here, are tremendous. This is an example of home water use. This comes from the California Building Industry Association report from about a year ago, January of 2010, that shows how much of the water spent in your average California home is spent on landscaping. It's over 50%. I think this measurement, I have to verify this from the person I got this graph from, but I'm pretty sure this measurement was made in Southern California. It's a little, the landscape water use is only a little bit less in Northern California. We use about 50%, not 57%. It's still a lot of water to go in your landscaping, into your lawns and your East Coast shrubs and Pittosporum hedges and so on and so forth. We do shower a lot in California, but that's all right. If you eliminate this, then you have more water to do other things with. This is an interesting graph, at least I think so. This shows across the seasons, across the months, how much water is required by plants that are in a traditional garden versus plants that are in a native garden, and how much rainfall you have in those same months. As you can see, during the summer months, this is, you may not be able to read it from back there, but this is May, June, July, August, September, October, November. So this is from about June to September. The non-native shrubs really require a lot of water. That's when we spend all our water. But where is the rainfall? It's over here. It's completely a different season, as we know, in our Mediterranean climate. We don't have personal catchment areas in our house, so we rely on the snowpack, and that goes up and down. But if you look at the watering needs of native plants across those same months, the native plants, yes, they do require a little bit of water, but this is about a tenth of the water needs of the non-native plants. So if you look at a graph like this that shows you how ridiculous it is to have lawns and non-native shrubs, continuously water them through the summer and continuously hire someone to mow the lawn and trim the hedges every week. It just doesn't make any sense. I guess it's 1/10. Maintenance requirements. We've already discussed this a little bit. You do have to maintain your native garden, but it doesn't mean you have to do it every week. So across the standard growing season, March through October, the maintenance, this graph is hours, and these are months. So you do put in a lot of hours for the green bars here, which is the traditional garden, constant pruning of the hedges and the shrubs and the lawn, while, you go in about once every 2 months, spend a couple of hours in your garden, maybe a little bit more in July, to clean up, some of those, wildflower plants if you have them. And this is what you put in for your native garden. Oops, I think I went the wrong direction. There we go. It's 1/5 the labor if you calculate the hours. And again, it's a rainfall graph in San Jose, average rainfall. And this indicates essentially San Jose, a lot of us live in San Jose, is 15 inches a year. Rainfall in a desert is less than 10 inches a year. For 7 months, there is no rain. So we live in the Mediterranean climate, so let's pick plants that are appropriate to the climate, is the point of this slide. Essentially, plants that are adapted to the Mediterranean climate go into dormancy in the summer, and they grow in the winter. Their roots are growing in the winter, which means, strange but true, if the rains fail in December, you have to water your plants. If you have a native garden, make sure you water it in the winter if rains fail. So, but not in the summer. I think we've talked about this. Now, a lot of people don't like the really dry look in their gardens in the summer, and they want it to look a little green. And you can do that by just a little bit of water in the summer. If you water your native garden about once a month, and that will retain a lush look on the sages, the salvias, and plants like that that you may have, native plants that you would have in your garden. So this is a very low watering need. And another thing that I don't think is mentioned in this slide, another thing native plants benefit from is a washing off of the foliage in the summer. You know, dust collects on the foliage in the summer, and native plants don't like that very much. So a little sprinkling, you know, with the hose to wash the dust off is a great thing, and they benefit from that. There are some plants that really should not be watered in the summer, and I think the one that I will specifically mention here are the local oaks that we have in our area. The coast live oak really should not be watered in the summer, and don't plant, please, if you move into a house that has an oak and you see a lawn under that oak, just strip that lawn out. And we have plants that are meant to grow under oaks. Put those plants under the oaks, because the leaf litter from the oak and those plants work with each other, and you know, you don't have a bare under oak ground, and yet you will benefit the oak by not watering it and not having lawn sprinklers run over it. Again, all young plants need water until they're established. That includes oaks. A significant benefit of native plants is its habitat value, you know, not to be diminished. Our children and we enjoy, I think, the presence of butterflies and butterfly caterpillars and dragonflies and bees. The native bees don't sting. They're mostly, you know, the bumblebee variety, and they're usually pretty to look at and really entertaining, in fact. If you ever walk by a strip that's filled with poppies, stand for a few minutes and watch the bee activity. It's super entertainment for our cul-de-sac, for the kids in our cul-de-sac, because these bees that have either a pale yellow or orange stripe on their back hurl themselves into the flower, roll around, fly out, and hurl themselves into the next flower. It's just entertainment for hours. You know, I tell you. Plants are at the bottom of the food chain. So, you know, the native flora has evolved with the native flora over millions of years. Just because a plant has been here for 100 years, people say, oh, that's native. It's been here for 200 years. Sorry, it really needs to have evolved with the flora for a few million years to be called native. Because, you know, insects don't adapt to plants that easily. You know, a few hundred years is not enough in the, you know, evolutionary period. This is a pale tiger swallowtail, by the way, on a milkweed. Many of the local insects depend on the local flora, and they are disappearing at amazing rates because the local flora is disappearing. And there are some insects that are called generalists. They will eat the leaves of non-native plants. But what people really appreciate is plants with no insect activity on them. It's what we call a sterile garden. You know, what you want is, you want to see some of your leaves chewed up by insects. That means you're planting things that are benefiting the local insect population. You obviously don't want all your plants eaten, the whole plant eaten up by the insects. So if you have a really small milkweed and, you know, it's only this high and you see 5 caterpillars on it, you know, use your judgment. You know, let it survive, let the plant survive till it's a little bit bigger before you let 5 caterpillars on it. But that's how it is. So I have a few slides here on insect biomass and observations, and I'm going to go through this little kind of quickly here. Native plants do produce far higher insect biomass in the local environment than non-native plants. I think the best example of this is the National Academy of Sciences, the living roof on the top. They've measured the insect activity on the living roof on the roof of that building to be about 4 or 5 times more than the insect activity in Golden Gate Park. You know, just that area. So it's a direct, measured, example of this. There is a great book by Douglas Talamy, which we might even be selling downstairs in our little book area, called Bringing Nature Home. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend that you read it. He's a professor at Dartmouth, I think, or Brown, I don't remember, one of those East Coast places. But he's an entomologist, but he writes to the lay person. It's not a scientific book. And he explains why it is so important to plant a diverse set of native plants in your garden. I'm just going to go through this. Caterpillars, native plants supported 35 times more caterpillar biomass than non-native plants. And our butterflies and moths are actually suffering quite a bit from the lack of native plants. Don't use chemicals, please. Organic alternatives are so much better if you do need it. Native plants really save dollars, and we talked about that already. Okay, so getting started with native plants. Now this whole section is about what can you grow in your garden easily and support some biodiversity. The first section is on annuals. So now annuals, there are two ways you can plant annuals. You can plant them in situ, or you can germinate and transplant. Both methods work, and it really is your preference on what you want to do. Let's talk a little bit about how to do this, and then pros and cons on each. So how do you plant plants in situ? So you have a prepared bed, you weed it thoroughly. Even if you weed it thoroughly, keep in mind that sometimes invasives and weeds leave a seed bank in the soil. So you may still need to continue weeding through the season. But you start, do your best. Weed before you start. When you're planting little seeds, remove all the extra leaves and mulch and things in that seed bed. The seeds have a little leaves, the cotyledons have a hard time pushing out through heavy mulch and leaf litter. So remove the organic matter. Scrape the soil slightly. There's no need to turn it over, no need for any hard labor here. Broadcast seeds over the bed, and then tamp lightly to establish contact with the seeds and soil. And water well. Now, I highly recommend that in this area, especially with so much bird activity overall, that if you can, cover the bed with a bird netting. Birds will often come and eat your seeds, and you'll wonder what happened to the seeds I sowed. If you're doing this over a large area, obviously you cannot cover it, but the best time to plant seeds is in the late fall, just before the rains start. So just a few things things like the bird netting is also slopes. My suggestion is don't start this process for the first time on a slope, because when it rains, often there's a little runoff on a slope and your seeds can get washed away as well. So, start in a flat area, if possible a small area where you can cover with bird netting, and if you go through this process, you will find your annuals, starting to grow in the spring. Even in late winter, in fact, by end December, January, they should start to show some activity. The second way to do this is to germinate and then transplant. And I think you have slightly better control over who gets to the seeds first. You, the birds, or the water wash off. If you follow, this is a little bit more work because you have to do the germination in different places and then transplant it. Use the 4-inch growing pots you find in nurseries. Water every other day until the roots reach bottom of pot. I actually use good potting soil from the nursery for this process. I don't use soil I dig out of the ground simply because of the seed bank problem. And then you transplant in early spring or late winter to a desired spot in your garden. They are in the pots, so they will need regular water. Sometimes people believe that rainwater is getting to their pots, but you have to check. You really have to check. Sometimes they don't. So make sure through the winter you keep it watered, either with a sprinkler at the end of your hose or with rain. And you can do this at any time, actually. This is not a bad time to start with some Clarkia seeds. you will have some late season Clarkias in your garden, when everything else is kind of quiet. We've talked about this: water regularly, wildflowers, weed regularly. The seed bank hardly ever goes away, so this is an ongoing process. And snails and slugs are a big problem in our gardens. And they really do love some of the native seedlings. So, do your best to, go out in the early evenings with a flashlight, pick up the snails. You can keep them in control that way. And I have a method which, if you have kids, you can try this. Offer a nickel or a dime per snail they pick up. And it actually works,
So sluggo doesn't affect the soil?
I'm sorry?
Sluggo doesn't affect the soil?
It will, and it really depends. You can use it 1 year, bring the snails under control. The time that you want to bring the snails under control is early spring. So if you pick off the really big fat snails at that time, then they don't create a lot of babies to be a problem later in the season. Techniques on planting: if you go buy a 1-gallon pot in the nursery, like if you bought one today, how you plant natives are a little different from how you would plant, how you've been advised to plant plants that you generally buy at the nursery. The most important thing is you want to have about the base of the plant needs to be above your general soil level, which means when you dig your hole, just make sure that you don't dig it too deep. It needs to come up at least an inch. Dig it twice as wide. Remove the plant from the pot, place it there, and fill these areas with soil. Tamp these areas down a little, and make the base of the plant just be sloped a little bit off the general soil, surrounding soil.
So why is that? Why the 1 inch instead?
A lot of native plants hate to be waterlogged, and they are susceptible to die on you if this spot is waterlogged. And one of the real reason you're doing this is not so much for the summer months, but for the winter months. So when there's excess, rain, like we've had this year, you don't want the rain water to kind of puddle around the base of the plant, because you can actually make the plant waterlogged. And also, if you have it high up there, when you do water it the first summer, water flows away from the base, and you are providing this area with the necessary air and space it needs. When you take the plant out of your pot, just like you've been advised with the other plants, if it is pot bound, the roots are going around, sometimes this is a real problem for a native plant. So straighten it out as gently as you can, and some plants will not actually survive if you find it pot bound like that. So, be careful when you buy the plant. Ask the nursery person, how long has this plant been in the pot? Is it likely that it's pot bound? If I take it out and I find it pot bound, can I bring it back? These are important questions to ask. So, in fact, for that reason, I personally prefer to buy plants in the 4-inch pot. Especially if they've just been just before they decide to move it to a gallon pot and keep it in there for 2 years. But good, reputable nurseries won't do this. Okay, so this is really important. Watering rule of thumb. The first year, you water once a week, and we're talking about the summer months now, but this applies to the winter as well if the rains fail. You've just planted, it's October, you've just put your plants in the soil, no sign of rain. It's been 3 weeks. Make sure you get out there and water your plants. In fact, you should be watering them once a week. The second year, you water once every 2 weeks. And my general advice also is, if it's a particularly hot week, watch for that. If it's the second year and your plant is still very young, it's very small, if you think, okay, it's 105 degrees today this week in San Jose, maybe I'm not going to wait 2 weeks. I'm going to give it a little bit of water, after a week. So, you have to be a little alert for a couple of years with native plants. But the payoff is actually quite good. Third year, once in 3 weeks. But I have to tell you, I've never done this. After 2 years, I've pretty much ignored my plants. And, they do just fine. There are some plants, though, that might need a little bit of care. So watch out for that. Fourth year and later, once a month. I do recommend once a month, at least to wash it off, because it gets dusty, and the plants look nice and bright if they're washed off. The leaves look nice and green again, and they do benefit from that. And that's what you've done now. After you've established the plant, you can back off from watering, and they'll do just fine. Actually, there's one more thing I need to say about this. If you buy plants from the chaparral plant community, it's really important that you don't put them often in heavy clay. The problem with heavy clay is that it's dense, and so water and air penetration is really poor, and these plants often don't have a long life in heavy clay. They may look okay for a couple of years, and they may look okay for 5 years and 6 years, but the chaparral plants have very long life. They live 30, 40, ceanothus, manzanitas that are in the chaparral live amazingly long times, 40 years. 50 years, some old manzanitas. But in clay, they may not live that long. In fact, they will not live that long. And you may be okay with that. So that's fine. If you like the look of that manzanita, you like the flower on that ceanothus, you want it in your clay garden, well, fine. But don't expect it to live 40 years. It's going to live maybe 10 years. So that's kind of the thinking that has to go into when you move a plant from one particular plant community to a different conditions. Sometimes they don't survive at all. Sometimes they do, but they won't have as long a life. Even if you've done all this. So, you may come to me in 10 years and say, look, you gave that talk that day on Sunday, and you told me if I did this, I'll have this plant. But, it died after 6 years. Well, sorry. That ceanothus is used to growing on the hillsides of Southern California in granite. You brought it into a Bay Area clay soil garden, that's life.
If you want to grow something like that
Yeah.
in your area, are there places you could buy suitable soil for something like that?
I am a strong advocate of not doing hard labor. I'm getting older. My back's not good anymore. I can't dig anymore. I hire my teenage son. So yes, technically you could. But you're talking about hauling, a couple of cubic yards of granite rocky soil. That's a lot of work. So I would think easy. Let's do what's easy. Let's find plants that grow easily in my clay soil. Steve.
One of the things about clay, maybe the worst thing about clay, is the permeability to water issue. You get all this water, it doesn't go through there. If you go and put mulch on the top, and that mulch decomposes over years, and it's going to attract worms and things, they're going to burrow in your soil, and they're going to improve your permeability,
Right.
and it doesn't degrade your back. So there are some ways around that too.
The reason I ask is because I really love ceanothus. I would really like to have some.
No. There are plenty of ceanothus that do well in clay soil. I was just being very contrary. There's plenty of ceanothus that do well.
Oh, good.
There are some out there that are fantastic that will not do well in the clay soil. So, if you're stubborn and you want that particular one, well, use a different one. And it's true, you do have to amend our clay soil. So don't ever forget to do that. You have to constantly add compost to our clay, either in the form of wood chips or mulch. Don't use that gorilla hair thing though, it's horrible. And leaf compost, let the leaves stay there. Don't pay those guys to blow away the last leaf in your garden, a little litter is good because the birds like it. You'll find a lot more birds visiting your garden if you let the little leaf litter around because they're in there looking for the worms and the insects. And if you have a tree that's a street tree that you can do nothing about, that has big waxy leaves, yes, you do need to get some of that out. But oak leaves and so many other leaves do just fine. What kind of maintenance do you need to do in your native garden? You need to cut back some of the perennials in late fall. And when you buy the plants and you go look up its maintenance needs, you'll understand what you need to do. And I'll try to point, as we talk through the 5 plants in each category, I need to get a move along here. I'll talk about that. Some planting, you do planting in the late fall, winter, preferably. Weeding in winter and spring. And early summer, you do need to tidy up your annuals. Those of you who have seen poppies around, they really look horrible by August. So go in and cut them, an inch off the ground or just yank them out. I grow poppies like a perennial. I go in and I cut them an inch off the ground. They come back next year. Little bit of summer watering. Relax, read your book in your hammock. Dream of fall. Okay, let's get to the plants. The 5 that thrive, the annuals, the poppies do really well. The globe gilia capitata, is a beautiful plant, and I have pictures of these. I'll get to that in a second after I just run through this list quickly. There are 2 different Clarkias on this list, the Ruby Chalice Clarkia and the Elegant Clarkia. Each one of those is really pretty, and they do really well in the garden. They're really easy to grow. And the meadow foam provides a different color to the garden, not just the pinks. The poppies, most of you have seen these. The globe gilia, what I like about the globe gilia is that they do reseed. It's an annual, and they do reseed, and you'll find babies the next year. So you don't have to keep buying them over and over again. They will come back in your meadow area. The Ruby Chalice Clarkia is a really pretty flower. The meadow foam, Limnanthus douglasii. Sulphurea just refers to the color, the sulfur-like color. And the Elegant Clarkia. This picture doesn't do it justice. If you go up close and actually look at the flower, let's see, there's one here that kind of shows itself. It's a really pretty flower.
Is it a bell?
It's not a bell. It has...
It's like little bow ties.
Yeah, it's like a little bow tie. Right. 5 plants that thrive in the perennial categories. I like these. The yarrow, the iris, the California aster, the lysingea, and the California fuchsia. An example photographs of these, the yarrow, the Achillea mellifolium. I have a story here that I like to tell. The reason it's called Achillea is after Achilles. So in the war, he used these plants on soldiers' wounds. You crush it up and you put that on on your cuts or your injuries, and they help heal. So this is a good plant to have in your garden. It's the same plant. Millefolium, because of the 1,000 little fern-like things on the leaves. They come in different colors too. Some of them are hybrids, but the white one is the native that you find in meadows and open woodlands when you walk there. Stanford, I don't know if they have it still. Stanford had a yarrow lawn once. They kept it mowed like a lawn substitute. The Douglas iris comes in different shades of white and purples. There are quite a few hybrids also available these days called PCH, Pacific Coast Hybrid.
Are those hard to get established in clay? I didn't have any luck with them.
They do like a little drainage. So I think the problem is the winter rains. So if you put them in clay and it's not in a little berm, I think they don't like to stand in soggy soil. So try planting them, build a little berm. And didn't really talk about that today, but if you build a little berm, then they do much better. Yeah, Steve.
Home Depot sells a cactus mix, and that's pretty good. I've had good luck with my irises that way.
Yes.
It drains really well.
Yeah, I have iris in 3 different parts of my garden, and one of them is actually pretty clayey and it isn't on a berm. And I think out of the 3 I planted there, 2 survived and 1 didn't. And now it's established, so I think it's not going to die on me. Just a couple of notes on maintenance. The iris is actually easy to divide, and they will actually grow out. But you must only divide them in the fall. So once the summer heat is gone and the weather is cooler, you can just take a spade, just go, no hard labor, go straight in, dig some out, and you can just move a piece of it to another place. So you can propagate them quite easily at home. The California aster, the Aster chilensis, has a long flowering season and it's profuse flowering. So it's a great ground cover plant, if you want flower color in the summer. The Leysingia is similar, kind of purple flower, and the bees, all the bees and the insects love all these plants. The Zauschneria, as it's called these days, we were supposed to use Latin names because those names don't change, but they keep changing the names on this. It used to be called Epilobium, but it's now Zauschneria, and the California fuchsia comes in many different varieties. There are the ground cover forms, there are the forms with the silvery leaves, there are the ones that are high up, 2 feet, 3 feet, huge variety. And they are extremely easy to divide in your garden. If you just cut a piece out, pop it in the soil somewhere else, it'll start growing. It's usually not invasive, so you have to actually move a piece somewhere. Again, this one needs a little late fall maintenance. They look much better next year if you go in and cut them close to the ground, and then you have a whole new fresh growth in the spring, and it looks pretty nice. Otherwise, it tends to get a little woody looking at the base.
And you plant that somewhere else in the fall time?
Yes. So you can go cut them and plant them in other places. In fact, football or basketball or something would break pieces of my plants out. The piece will go fall somewhere else and will root and start growing there. So it's a common thing. 5 that thrive in the shrub category. Toyon, the popular tree that you see around on many of our hillsides. The coffeeberry, pink flowering currant. It's a deciduous bush that I'll show you pictures in a second. That is a great, puts on a great show in early spring. The sticky monkey flower, California buckwheat. The toyon is a very hardy shrub, in fact. I found it to grow well in conditions of sun, part shade, less water, more water. So if you're looking for a tree that needs to be close to the fence next to your neighbor's lawn that they're going to water through the summer, right? So you want to be a drought-tolerant garden, but so you need a plant that's going to resist that water. Toyon is not a bad choice. It'll, and if they stop watering, it'll still do okay. So, interesting tidbit here on, this is the plant that caused Hollywood to be called Hollywood. People came and they saw toyon bushes covering the hillsides. They thought it was holly from a distance, and they called it Hollywood. It's actually this plant. Toyon wood.
Are those berries?
Did you say it was drought resistant?
Drought, yes it is. Yeah, once it's established, it will be drought resistant as well. I'm sorry, there was another question.
Are those berries?
Those are berries, and the cedar waxwings love it. So in the late fall and through the winter, the cedar waxwings will come to your garden and eat these berries, and then you'll see them flying around a little drunken, and again, interesting entertainment. This is so entertaining. Coffee berry is, again, there's a large variety of coffee berries available out there. There are the low ones, the medium ones, and most coffee berries do get pretty big. They are big shrubs. So make sure when you buy a coffee berry, you know this is the one that's going to get 8 feet by 8 feet, and you have the space for this. Again, they have berries, the birds love it.
Excuse me, on the previous one with the berries, how tall does that get?
This is the standard one, the Rhamnus californica. It's not one of the varieties. So this particular one gets about 8 feet by 8 feet eventually.
No,
Oh, you
the one
mean-
I was thinking of.
Oh.
For the berries. That one.
The Toyon is a large shrub and a small tree. So, it will eventually can get to about 20 feet, 25 feet high. The ribes, there are many species of ribes available in California. The difference between the currants and the gooseberries are the currants have no thorns and the gooseberries have thorns. So this is the pink flowering kind. We have the golden kind, the Orion, and all of them have a spectacular flower show in the early spring. It's deciduous, so the leaves do fall away, and you do want to incorporate a few deciduous plants in your garden. It has many benefits. One, they provide a leaf litter. Two, the tender new leaves, I know a lot of people don't think about it this way, the tender new leaves is important food source in the early spring for lots of birds and insects. Deciduous plants play an important role in our ecology. The sticky monkey flower, my recommendation on this one is that, it needs good drainage. You see the monkey flowers growing all over our hillsides. You walk in Edgewood, you see them. They do need good drainage. So if you have heavy clay, make sure you amend it with this cactus mix that Steve was talking about. Build a berm, provide it with good drainage. Then it has a spectacular flower show almost right through summer. And the California buckwheats, a really important plant in our ecology for butterflies and and insects. And it is, I did forget to mention, the buckwheat, like the fuchsia, the Zauschneria, is a late flowering plant. So which means it provides you with color in your garden late in the season, August, September time frame. And you can leave the buckwheat flowers on your plant through the winter. So, they provide a certain element of interest in the garden through the winter. Then you can shear them in the early spring or late winter.
Do the flowers change color over the year? I know I've seen these kind of buckwheats with kind of a rusty.
There are so many different kinds of buckwheat again. A lot of them do go brown, rust colored through the winter. So, it's a nice look to your garden, rusty look in the garden. The Eriogonum rubescens, there's a variety called Grande, has pink flowers, and that does get to be a nice deep rust color.
What was the name of that?
Rubescens, Rubescens. The variety is Grande. It's easily available in nurseries.
How big does it get?
It's small. It's maximum 2 feet by 2 feet, 18 inches by 18 inches. All right? Steve? Oh. Okay, so we are in the last category, trees. The holly leaf cherry, the Prunus ilicifolia, is a common tree. It's native to our county, Santa Clara County. It's growing, grows natively in the hillsides around, so it's easy to grow in your garden. The blue elderberry has nice white flowers now. You know, if you drive around Stanford Hills, you see them everywhere. They do have an edible berry. Some people, you know, it's a matter of opinion how edible it is. The California Buckeye, I think, is a beautiful tree underused in our gardens. If you would like one tree in your garden to attract butterflies, that's the tree you need to use. It attracts the most number of butterflies. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's an unbelievable number, like 37 or something, you know, butterflies that it attracts. Coast live oak, if you have the space for it, or if you have one already. The Quercus agrifolia, and the valley oak is a beautiful oak. The valley oak, where it's growing in nature, is usually not too far from water source and a stream side. So that's the kind of environment you need to provide it. If you live in the Cupertino Hills or Los Altos Hills and you have a stream in your backyard and you have the space for an oak, you can use a valley oak close by. This is what the holly leaf cherry looks like. I think I see some flowers on the tree. It's not a spectacular flower show, but it's an important tree in our environment. And that's what the white flowers on the blue elderberry look like.
How big is that one?
It will get big eventually. So it's a tree category. I think I went on a hike once with someone at Arastradero Preserve, and I saw this tree at a distance. It looked really big, and it had white flowers, and I said, I don't know what that tree is, you know? What is so big with white flowers? And he said, that is an elderberry. So it was, you know, it was as tall as the laurel or something that was next to it. But I think it's very slow growing. It's not going to get to that height really quickly.
I'll be able to sell a house before they work that one out.
Yeah.
How come it's called blue?
Well, the berries kind of look bluish, the elderberry on the tree.
Is this what they make elderberry wine
Mm-hmm.
They make elderberry wine from the European elderberry, usually. And that's, the, you know, the elderberry syrup or the extract you get for immune support is from the other elderberry. Not from this one, I don't think so. Its Latin name is different.
I need
Oh.
people to call.
You know, there's a blue elderberry in the Ullastech Natural Area,
Uh-huh.
and it's a wonderful tree to go visit when it's in fruit.
In fruit.
Because you will see all kinds of birds on that tree, and it's a really big one. You'll be able to see how big they get.
The California Buckeye. It's an amazing tree, has this amazing flower. It sheds all its leaves by end of July. So in August, you know, if you have one in your garden, people walking by will say, is that tree dead? When are you going to take it down? It's not dead. That's its natural growing cycle. You know, that's what its mechanism is for drought tolerance. But it is the best host tree for butterflies. How big does it get? Again, you know, it's not a very fast-growing tree, and it tends to get wider than taller, you know, over time. But it does okay with pruning. So it does. I have a neighbor 5 houses down from me, and you know, they moved in recently, you know, 5 years ago. But whoever planted the Buckeye in their yard has done a beautiful job of pruning. So when all the leaves are gone, it has this beautiful form. It's just fantastic. So I think it's obviously been pruned to look that way. It's a great time to go see Buckeyes in their natural state. If you drive on Junipero Serra between Foothill Expressway and Sandhill Road in Stanford, the whole road, you'll see that there are all these Buckeyes hidden there because you can see all the flowers now. The flowers are just starting to come. So, you know, go in a couple of weeks because we've had a late spring because of the rains. You'll see what the Buckeyes look like in nature. They grow in the understory of oaks and other trees, and, you know, they're in part shade usually. We're almost done. This is the coast live oak, the one we see around. which the squirrels bury in our gardens, and then we have 100 oak saplings the next year. And the valley oak is a beautiful form. It's a huge tree, and it's, I don't know where this picture is from, but it doesn't, it looks like it's between two houses. It's not where it would like to be, I imagine, in the long term. Resources, there are books out there on native plant gardens and gardening, and we have a little book sales area downstairs. Do go, feel free to browse. The Habitat Garden book by Nancy Bauer is especially good if you're interested in gardening for butterflies and insects and wildlife. And Nancy Bauer is going to give a talk at the San Carlos Library in May, in a couple of weeks. So come to the talk if you're interested. The CNPS, we also sponsor a Going Native Garden Tour, which happened last weekend. You just missed it. If you didn't miss it, wonderful. The Gardening with Natives group is a great resource if you're interested in starting to garden with native plants. You can go sign up. It's a Yahoo group with over 1,000 people now. It's moderated, and the discussions are lively and informative. There are many professionals on that group, so you can ask questions about how does this plant do, or I have this kind of an area, what plant would I use here? And you would actually get really good responses to those kind of questions. And in general, check our website, CNPS-SCV, SCV is Santa Clara Valley.org, for talks, for these tours, for field trips, and things like that. And I know I'm kind of out of time, but I'm happy to take some questions if somebody wants to stay and ask questions.